The radio crackled at 1847 hours on Christmas Eve, and Lieutenant Commander Raven Okonjo heard 12 men begin to die. She stood in the doorway of the communications tent at FOB Vanguard, a cup of cold coffee frozen halfway to her lips, as the voice of Master Chief Elias Vance cut through the static with the controlled panic of a man who had seen everything and knew exactly how bad this was. Trident 6 is pinned down, he said. Grid reference Echo 7-9er. We walked into a kill box. I have 2 men down and enemy forces closing from 3 directions, requesting immediate extraction. Raven set the coffee down. Around her, the forward operating base sat quiet under an Afghan winter sky. The skeleton crew of Christmas Eve moving slowly between buildings strung with improvised lights someone had fashioned from MRE packaging and wire. Most of the base had drawn down for the holiday. Most of the helicopters sat cold on the pad. Most of the people who could authorize a rescue were thousands of miles away, eating turkey with their families. Before we get into what happened next, drop a comment and let us know what state or country you're listening from tonight. Maybe you have military in your family. Maybe you know what it means to wait for someone to come home. Wherever you are part of this story now. The response came within minutes, and it came from Captain Wayne Prescott in the Tactical Operations Center. Raven had never trusted Prescott. The man had risen through channels that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with knowing whose hand to shake at the Pentagon. He wore his authority like a borrowed coat, always adjusting it, always aware of how it looked to others. When his voice came over the radio, it carried the particular coldness of someone running calculations that had nothing to do with the men bleeding in a valley 23 minutes away. Trident 6, this is Vanguard Actual, Prescott said. What is your current ammunition status and casualty count? The answer came broken by gunfire. 2 Kia, 1 critical, 9 still fighting. Ammunition at 40% and dropping. We cannot hold this position past midnight. I say again, requesting immediate extraction. Raven moved toward the TOC without conscious decision, her boots crunching on frozen gravel. She knew the Karengal Valley. She had flown into that nightmare terrain 6 times in the past year, threading her Black Hawk through mountain passes where the margins between survival and a fireball were measured in feet. She knew what those SEALs were facing. She knew the fear that lived in the space between radio calls, the way time stretched when you were counting rounds and watching the darkness for muzzle flashes. Inside the TOC, Prescott stood before the main display, his face washed blue by the screens showing satellite imagery of the valley. 3 other officers clustered nearby, none of them meeting each other's eyes. Raven recognized the body language. She had seen it before, in rooms where bad decisions were being wrapped in official language. The risk assessment is unfavorable, Prescott was saying. Enemy mortar positions have the extraction zone covered. Any helicopter that enters that valley is going to take fire. We could lose the aircraft and crew in addition to the ground team. Sir, one of the junior officers said, those are 12 SEALs out there. I am aware of the number, Lieutenant. I am also aware that sending a helicopter into a confirmed kill zone on Christmas Eve with a skeleton crew and no close air support is not a rescue. It is a donation to the enemy of additional American assets. Prescott adjusted his glasses, a gesture Raven had come to recognize as his way of distancing himself from whatever he was about to say. The mathematics simply do not support intervention. Raven stepped forward. Sir, I can have my bird in the air in 15 minutes. I know that valley. I have extracted teams from worse positions. Prescott turned to look at her, and something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, yes, but something else too. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. Lieutenant Commander Okonjo, I was not aware you were monitoring tactical channels from your quarters. I was in the comm tent, sir, and I am volunteering to fly this extraction. Your volunteering is noted and declined. This is not a matter for individual heroics. It is a command decision based on operational realities. Prescott turned back to the display. Trident 6 will shelter in place and await reassessment at first light. First light is 8 hours away, Raven said. They will be dead in 3. That is speculation, Lieutenant Commander. What is not speculation is the certain loss of a $40 million aircraft and its crew if we send them into that valley tonight. I will not authorize that risk." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of finality. "Classify the situation as unrecoverable. Log my decision and the timestamp. That will be all." The words hung in the air of the TOC like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge. Unrecoverable. A single word that meant 12 men would spend their last hours on Earth knowing that their country had done the math and found them wanting. Raven stood motionless as the other officers began to drift away, their faces carefully blank. She watched Prescott return to his calculations, his fingers moving across a tablet with the detached efficiency of a man updating a spreadsheet. Outside, somewhere in the darkness beyond the wire, a generator hummed its endless mechanical prayer. Christmas lights blinked in a window across the compound. And 23 minutes away by air, 12 of the finest warriors America had ever produced were running out of ammunition and time. She thought of her brother. She always thought of her brother at moments like this, when the machinery of military bureaucracy ground up against the raw human truth of men fighting to survive. Marcus had believed in the system. Marcus had trusted that when things went wrong, someone would come. Marcus had died waiting. The radio on Prescott's desk crackled one more time. "Vanguard, this is Trident 6. He paused. "Understood. We will hold as long as we can. Merry Christmas." Raven turned and walked out of the TOC into the cold Afghan night. Her hand brushed against the patch on her flight suit, the worn eagle of her brother's squadron that she had carried into every mission for 3 years. Behind her, the door to the operations center stood like a barrier between two worlds. On one side, men with clean hands making clean decisions. On the other, the darkness and the mountains and 12 men who deserved better than mathematics. She had 8 hours until first light. 8 hours until Prescott's reassessment that they all knew would never come in time. 8 hours to decide if her career, her freedom, and possibly her life were worth less than doing what she knew was right. Raven Okonjo looked up at the moonless sky and made her choice. 23 minutes away by air, Master Chief Elias Prophet Vance pressed his back against a crumbling mud wall and counted his men by the sound of their breathing. 10 left now. 10 men in a collapsed compound that had become their tomb, surrounded by an enemy that smelled blood and had all the time in the world. The 2 they had lost lay, covered by a tarp in the corner, their dog tags already collected, their stories already over. The one critical was Petty Officer Jonas Whitfield, 22 years old, first deployment, who had taken shrapnel across his abdomen when he threw himself over a teammate during the initial ambush. Prophet crawled to where Whitfield lay, the young man's face pale as Afghan snow in the dim light of a single chem light. Doc Rainier had done what he could, but what he could do without a surgical suite and blood supply was keep the kid comfortable and pray. Whitfield's eyes fluttered open as Prophet approached. "Chief," he whispered, "are they coming for us?" Prophet had been a SEAL for 20 years. He had lied to enemies, lied to intelligence officers, lied to journalists who wanted stories he would never tell. But he had never lied to one of his men. "Help is on the way," he said, and felt the words turn to ash in his mouth. "You just hold on, Whitfield. You hold on, and you let us do the worrying." He moved back to the firing position where Senior Chief Cameron Briggs was watching the northern approach through a cracked night vision scope. Briggs did not look up when Prophet settled beside him. His voice came flat and professional, the way it always did when things were worst. "I counted 30 plus on the North Ridge," he said. "Another 20 circling east. They are not rushing because they do not have to. They know we are not going anywhere." Ammunition count? Briggs finally turned, and even in the darkness Prophet could see the truth in his eyes. "Maybe 200 rounds total across all of us. 4 grenades. Hansen's saw is down to 1 belt." He paused. "We can hold maybe 90 minutes of sustained contact. After that, we are down to knives and harsh language." Prophet nodded. He had known the numbers before asking. A leader always knew the numbers. The question was what you did with them when the numbers said you were going to die. Back at FOB Vanguard, Raven stood in the shadows between two equipment containers, watching the TOC from a distance. The lights inside painted yellow rectangles on the frozen ground. She could see Prescott through the window, still at his station, probably drafting the after-action report that would explain why 12 men had been acceptable losses on Christmas Eve. The language would be careful. The language was always careful. Operational constraints, risk assessment protocols, unfavorable tactical environment. Nowhere in that report would it say that Wayne Prescott had looked at 12 American lives and decided they were not worth his career. A footstep crunched behind her, and Raven turned to find Chief Warrant Officer Diego Rojas approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Her co-pilot moved like he always did, quiet and certain. A man who had spent 15 years flying Night Stalker missions and had learned that silence was usually the better part of communication. He handed her a cup without speaking and stood beside her, following her gaze to the TOC. "I heard," he said finally. Everyone heard. Raven wrapped her hands around the warmth of the cup. 12 men, Diego. 12 of our people." Rojas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had 4 children at home and understood exactly what he was about to say. "My wife is going to kill me." Raven looked at him. "If we do what I think you were thinking about doing," Rojas continued, "if we take that bird up without authorization, Maria is going to kill me dead." He took a sip of his coffee. "But my kids are going to grow up knowing their father did not leave men to die on Christmas Eve because some desk jockey got nervous about his performance review. Diego, I cannot ask you to throw away your career. You're not asking." He turned to face her fully, and in the dim light his expression held something that looked like peace. "I have flown with you for 3 years, Commander. I have seen you do things with a helicopter that should not be possible. I have watched you bring people home when everyone else said it cannot be done." He shrugged. "If you think you can get those SEALs out, then I am your co-pilot. Same as always." The warmth that spread through Raven's chest had nothing to do with the coffee. She thought of all the missions they had flown together, all the close calls and impossible extractions. Diego Rojas had never once questioned her judgment in the air. He had simply trusted, and that trust had kept them both alive. "There's something else you should know," she said. "Prescott did not just deny the mission because of risk assessment. He denied it because of me." Rojas raised an eyebrow. 3 years ago I testified at an inquiry. A mission that went wrong, decisions that were made, people who died because someone in command got scared. Raven felt the old anger rising in her chest. "I did not know who gave the final order to abort that rescue. I just knew it was wrong, and I said so on the record. I found out 6 months later that the officer I helped end was Prescott's mentor, his rabbi in the promotion system." Rojas let out a low whistle. "So this is personal for him. This is a man killing 12 SEALs to punish me for telling the truth." Raven drained her coffee and crushed the cup in her fist. "And I am done letting men like him decide who lives and who dies." In the valley, Prophet gathered his men in the center of the compound. 9 faces looked back at him, some bloody, all exhausted, none of them showing an ounce of quit. These were SEALs. These were men who had volunteered for the hardest training the military had to offer and come out the other side harder than the mountains around them. If they were going to die tonight, they would die as they had lived. "Listen up," Prophet said. "Vanguard has classified us as unrecoverable. That means no extraction until morning, if then. We all know what that means." No one spoke. No one needed to. "But here's what else I know," Prophet continued. "I know that somewhere on that base, someone is looking at this situation and refusing to accept it. I know that there are pilots who do not give a damn about risk assessments when Americans are dying. I have seen it before. I have been saved by it before." He looked at each of his men in turn. "So we hold. We conserve ammunition. We make them pay for every inch. And we trust that someone out there has not forgotten what that uniform means." Briggs spoke from the shadows. "And if no one comes?" Prophet smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had made his peace. "Then we make sure they remember Trident 6 for a very long time." The radio on Prophet's vest crackled with static, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he heard something beneath the white noise. A voice, maybe. A whisper of hope in the darkness. He keyed his mic Nightbird. "If you can hear this, we are still here. "We're still fighting," the static answered. But somewhere in that static, Prophet could have sworn he heard the distant thrum of rotor blades. Raven spent the next hour exploring every official channel she could find, and every channel led to the same wall. She tried reaching Colonel Hargrove at Bagram, but Hargrove was on leave in Germany and his deputy deferred to local command authority. She tried the Joint Operations Center in Kabul, but Christmas Eve had left only a Skeleton Watch officer who promised to log her concern and escalate in the morning. She even tried reaching Naval Special Warfare Command directly, knowing it was a long shot, and found herself talking to an answering service that wished her happy holidays. The system was not broken. The system was working exactly as designed, funneling every decision back to the man who had already made his choice. Wayne Prescott had positioned himself as the single point of authority on a night when no one else was watching, and he had used that position to condemn 12 men to death. Raven was standing outside the communications center, weighing options that grew darker by the minute, when a voice spoke from the shadows beside her. "You're not going to find help through channels, Lieutenant Commander. The channels are exactly where Prescott wants you looking." Raven turned to find Lieutenant Commander Adrian Cho stepping into the light. The intelligence officer was small and precise, with the kind of face that revealed nothing unless she wanted it to. Raven had worked with her twice before on mission planning, and both times she had come away with the impression that Cho saw things other people missed and kept most of what she saw to herself. "Commando Cho." Raven kept her voice neutral. "I was not aware intelligence was monitoring my communications. I'm not monitoring anything officially." Cho moved closer, her voice dropping. "I am here because I saw Prescott's decision come through, and I know what it means. I also know something about that valley that changes the calculation." Raven's pulse quickened. "What do you know?" Cho glanced around, checking for observers, then pulled a tablet from beneath her jacket. She tapped the screen and turned it toward Raven. The display showed a satellite image of the Karangal Valley, overlaid with red markers indicating enemy positions. "The mortar teams surrounding Trident 6 are operating on a rotation," Cho said. 3 positions, each firing in sequence to maintain constant coverage of the extraction zone. She traced her finger across the screen. But here is what Prescott either did not notice or did not care about. These are not professional artillerymen. They are insurgent crews working with captured equipment. Their reload time is inconsistent, but it follows a pattern. Raven studied the image. What kind of pattern? Every 45 minutes, all 3 crews reload simultaneously. Cho highlighted a timestamp on the image. It takes them approximately 90 seconds to break down, reload, and resight their tubes. During those 90 seconds, the extraction zone is clear. 90 seconds. Raven felt the numbers clicking into place in her head. That is not much time. It is enough time for a pilot who knows what she is doing. Cho met her eyes. "I have seen your file, Commander. I know about Yemen. I know about the extraction in Kandahar province when everyone said it could not be done. 90 seconds is a lifetime for someone like you." Raven looked at the tablet, at the red markers and the blue square that represented 10 men waiting to die. The mathematics that Prescott had used to justify abandonment were being rewritten in front of her. There was a window, a small window, a dangerous window, but a window nonetheless. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why are you risking your career to help me?" Cho was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost its professional detachment. "Because 3 years ago, I was the intelligence officer on another mission that got classified as unrecoverable. I provided the analysis that said extraction was too risky. I watched the situation feed as 6 Americans died waiting for help that never came." She paused. One of them was a pilot named Marcus Okonjo. The name hit Raven like a physical blow. She felt her breath catch, felt the world narrow to a single point of focus. "You knew my brother. I knew his file. I knew his capabilities. And I knew that the man who made the call to abandon him was wrong." Cho shook her head slowly. "I have carried that for 3 years, Commander. I have watched Prescott fail upward while your brother and 5 others are nothing but stars on a wall somewhere. I will not carry another 6 names. Another 10 names. Not when there is something I can do about it. Raven took the tablet from Cha's hands, studying the reload pattern, memorizing the timing. The next window would open at 2,239 hours. That gave her less than 2 hours to prepare, to plan, to convince Rojas that 90 seconds was enough time to save 10 lives. The mortar positions, she said. If we time this wrong, if we're even 30 seconds late, you will be flying into a kill zone, Cho finished. I know. That is why I am giving you everything I have. Approach vectors, enemy sight lines, terrain features that can provide cover. She reached into her jacket and produced a small drive. It is all here. Encrypted, but you will figure it out. Raven took the drive, feeling its weight like a promise. What happens to you when Prescott finds out you helped me? Cho smiled, and there was something fierce in it, something that had been waiting 3 years to be released. Let me worry about Prescott. You worry about bringing those men home. In the valley, the enemy was getting closer. Prophet could hear them moving in the darkness, probing the perimeter, testing for weaknesses. They had stopped the direct assaults after losing a dozen men to SEAL marksmanship, but they were patient. They knew the math as well as Prescott did. Tom was on their side. Whitfield had stopped responding to voices. Doc Rainier had him on the last of their morphine, keeping him comfortable, keeping him quiet. The young man's breathing had taken on a wet, rattling quality that Prophet recognized from too many battlefields. Without surgery in the next few hours, he would not see Christmas morning. Prophet keyed his radio one more time, broadcasting blind into the static. This is Trident 6 to any friendly aircraft. We are at grid reference Echo 79er. 10 souls, 1 critical. We will mark our position with IR strobe on approach. He paused, listening to the empty hiss of the frequency. If anyone can hear this, we are still here. The static offered no reply, but Prophet kept the radio close anyway, because hope was the only ammunition that never ran out. Back at the FOB, Raven found Rojas waiting by their helicopter, already running through pre-flight checks by flashlight. He looked up as she approached, saw the drive in her hand, and nodded once. You found a way, he said. It was not a question. 90 seconds. Raven climbed up to the cockpit and began her own checks. We have a 90-second window when the mortars are reloading. We go in fast, we load fast, we get out before they can resight. Rojas whistled low. That is tight. That is all we have. She looked at him across the darkened cockpit. Last chance to walk away, Diego. He laughed, soft and certain. Commander, I have 4 kids who are going to hear this story someday. He settled into his seat and reached for his helmet. Let us give them a good one. The pre-flight checks were nearly complete when a flashlight beam cut across the helicopter pad like an accusation. Raven looked up from her instrument panel to see Senior Chief Maxwell, Drayden, marching toward them. His face twisted into something between anger and satisfaction. Behind him, 2 security personnel followed at a careful distance, their hands resting on their sidearms. Drayden had been with the Night Stalkers for 18 years, and he had spent most of those years making it clear that women had no place in special operations aviation. He was old guard, old thinking, and old grudges, and right now he was exactly where Prescott needed him to be. Step away from the aircraft, Lieutenant Commander. Drayden stopped at the edge of the rotor arc, his voice carrying the authority of a man who believed completely in the chain of command. Captain Prescott has designated this bird as grounded pending maintenance review. Raven climbed down from the cockpit slowly, keeping her hands visible. There is nothing wrong with this aircraft, Senior Chief. I ran full diagnostics 2 days ago. That is not your determination to make. Drayden smiled, and there was no warmth in it. The captain has concerns about flight readiness. Concerns that will take at least 12 hours to properly evaluate. 12 hours. The words hung in the cold air between them. 12 hours meant sunrise. 12 hours meant too late. 12 hours meant Prescott had found a way to keep her grounded without directly ordering her not to fly. Rojas appeared at Raven's shoulder, his presence solid and steady. Senior Chief, there are 10 men dying in that valley right now. 10 Americans who trusted us to come for them. I am aware of the tactical situation, Chief Warrant Officer. Drayden did not even look at him. I am also aware that Captain Prescott has made a command decision based on factors above your pay grade. He turned his attention back to Raven. You want to file a complaint? You can do that through proper channels in the morning. Right now, you're going to step away from this helicopter and return to your quarters. Raven felt the anger building in her chest, the same anger that had driven her to testify 3 years ago, the same anger that had cost her promotions and assignments, and the quiet respect of officers who valued compliance over conscience. She thought of Marcus, of the radio calls that had gone unanswered, of the morning when they had finally sent helicopters to find nothing but bodies. Let me ask you something, Senior Chief. She kept her voice level controlled. When you go home after this deployment, when you sit down with your family and they ask what you did on Christmas Eve, what are you going to tell them? Drayden blinked. I'm going to tell them I followed orders. 10 men, Raven said. 10 men with families just like yours. Wives waiting by the phone. Kids who hung stockings and went to bed believing their fathers would come home. She stepped closer, close enough to see the uncertainty flicker in Drayden's eyes. You're going to tell your family that you followed orders while those kids became orphans. The security personnel exchanged glances. One of them, a young specialist whose name tape read Thornton, shifted his weight uncomfortably. That is not fair, Drayden said, but some of the certainty had left his voice. None of this is fair. Raven gestured toward the mountains beyond the wire. What is happening in that valley right now is not fair. What Prescott is doing from his climate-controlled operations center is not fair. But we get to choose what we do about it. We get to choose whether we follow orders that are wrong or whether we do what we know is right. Drayden stood silent for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying the bite of Afghan winter across the flight line. In the distance, the lights of the TOC glowed like a false promise of warmth and safety. I have my orders, he said finally, but the words came slower now, heavier. I cannot let you take this aircraft. You are not letting me do anything. Raven turned back toward the helicopter. I am making a choice. The same choice you are making right now. The only difference is that I am choosing to live with the consequences. She climbed back into the cockpit without looking back. Rojas followed, sliding into his seat with the practiced ease of 1,000 missions. Below them, Drayden stood frozen, caught between the chain of command and something older, something that lived in the space between regulations and righteousness. Senior Chief. Specialist Thornton spoke from behind Drayden, his voice barely above a whisper. My brother is a SEAL. He is not with Trident 6, but he could be. Someday, it could be him waiting for extraction while someone does math in an operations center. Drayden turned to look at the young specialist, and something in his expression cracked. Inside the TOC, Captain Wayne Prescott reviewed the satellite feed with growing satisfaction. Drayden had reported the confrontation at the flight line, had confirmed that the helicopter remained grounded, had assured him that Lieutenant Commander Okonjo was contained. Everything was proceeding according to plan. By morning, the situation in the valley would be resolved one way or another, and his decision would be validated by the cold logic of tactical reality. His tablet chimed with an incoming message from Kabul. Routine holiday greetings from the command structure, nothing that required response. He scrolled past it and pulled up the personnel file he had been reviewing earlier. Raven Okonjo, decorated pilot, spotless flight record, and a persistent thorn in his side ever since she had testified against his mentor and derailed a career that had been heading for stars. She thought she was better than the system. She thought her judgment mattered more than the chain of command. She thought that being right was enough. Prescott closed the file and allowed himself a small smile. Being right had never been enough. Being right without power was just noise. And tonight, he had all the power he needed. Sir, one of the watch officers looked up from his console, confusion evident in his voice. I am picking up something unusual on the flight line. Prescott frowned. Define unusual. Before the officer could answer, the sound reached them through the walls of the TOC. Faint at first, then building, the unmistakable whine of turbine engines spooling up, the growing thunder of rotor blades biting into cold mountain air. Prescott was on his feet before the sound fully registered, his face draining of color. She would not dare. But even as he said it, Even as he lunged for the radio to order her grounded, he knew with sudden certainty that Raven Okonjo would dare anything. The helicopter was already lifting off, its navigation lights blinking against the darkness as it climbed above the base and banked hard toward the mountains, toward the valley, toward the men he had abandoned. Prescott grabbed the radio, his voice cracking with fury. "Unauthorized aircraft. You are ordered to return to base immediately. This is a direct order from Vanguard Actual. Return to base or face immediate court-martial upon landing." The radio hissed with static. Then Raven's voice came through, calm and clear and utterly without fear. "Negative, Vanguard. I have 10 Americans waiting for extraction. Okonjo out." The line went dead, and Captain Wayne Prescott stood alone in his operations center, watching his career fly toward the mountains on the wings of a woman who had just declared war on everything he represented. The Black Hawk cut through the Afghan night at 140 knots, hugging the terrain so close that Raven could see individual rocks in the green wash of her night vision display. Behind her, the lights of FOB Vanguard had already disappeared into the darkness. Ahead, the mountains of the Karengal rose like teeth against the starless sky. Rojas monitored the instruments beside her, his voice steady in her headset. 21 minutes to target. Window opens at 22:39. We are on schedule. Raven nodded without speaking. Her hands moved across the controls with the automatic precision of 15 years of flight time, making constant micro-adjustments to keep them below the radar horizon of enemy spotters. This was the part she had trained for. This was the part that felt like breathing. But beneath the calm surface of her focus, something else was stirring. A memory she had kept locked away for 3 years, rising now like a tide she could no longer hold back. Christmas Eve. It was always Christmas Eve. 3 years ago, she had been stationed at Bagram, flying routine transport runs while her brother Marcus flew combat search and rescue out of a forward base in Helmand Province. They had talked on the satellite phone that morning, trading complaints about powdered eggs and promises to video call their mother together on Christmas Day. Marcus had been laughing about something, some joke one of his crew chiefs had told him, and Raven had been half listening while she reviewed flight manifests. That was the last time she heard his voice. The call came 6 hours later. A special operations team had been ambushed near the Pakistani border. Marcus and his crew had launched for extraction, but enemy fire had been too heavy. Command had ordered them to abort, to return to base, to leave the ground team to their fate. Marcus had refused. He had pushed into the kill zone anyway, determined to bring those men home. His helicopter had taken an RPG through the tail rotor at 400 feet. There were no survivors. The official report called it pilot error. The official report said Marcus had exceeded his operational parameters, had ignored direct orders, had made decisions above his authority. The official report absolved everyone in the chain of command and laid the blame entirely on a dead man who could not defend himself. Raven had read that report 17 times. She had memorized every word, every evasion, every carefully constructed lie. And she had testified at the inquiry that followed, had told the truth about what she knew, had watched careers end and alliances shatter because she refused to let her brother be remembered as a reckless fool. She had never known that Wayne Prescott was connected to the officer she had helped bring down. She had never known that her testimony had made her an enemy of a man she would not meet for another 2 years. But she knew now, and knowing made everything clearer. Marcus had died because someone in a comfortable chair had decided that risk calculations mattered more than American lives. Marcus had died because the system valued obedience over courage. Marcus had died, and the man who had helped kill him was still giving orders, still making the same choices, still treating soldiers like numbers on a spreadsheet. Not tonight. Not while Raven could still fly. "Commander," Rojas spoke carefully, the way he always did when he sensed something fragile in the air. "You still with me?" Raven blinked, pulling herself back to the present. The instruments glowed steady green. The mountains scrolled past beneath them. Everything was on schedule. "I am here," she said, "just thinking about someone." Rojas was quiet for a moment. "Your brother." It was not a question, and Raven did not pretend otherwise. He would have made this flight. He would have been in this seat, doing exactly what we're doing right now. She adjusted their heading slightly, threading between two peaks that rose like sentinels in the darkness. He died because he believed that you do not leave people behind, because he believed that some things matter more than orders. He was right, Rojas said simply. Raven felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of grief and anger that had been tightening for 3 years. She thought of Marcus, of his laugh, of the way he used to call her Birdie when they were kids because she was always watching the sky. She thought of the men waiting in that valley, of the families who would wake up on Christmas morning not knowing if their fathers and husbands and sons were alive or dead. She thought of Wayne Prescott, sitting in his operations center, believing that he had won. 15 minutes to target, Rojas announced. Starting descent to final approach altitude. The helicopter dropped lower, skimming the ridgelines now, using the terrain to mask their approach. Raven could see the glow of fires in the valley ahead, the scattered lights of enemy positions surrounding the compound where Trident 6 waited. The mortar teams would be preparing for their next barrage. The clock was ticking toward the window that Cho had identified. 90 seconds. That was all she had. 90 seconds to land, load 10 men, and climb back out before the mortars found their range. 90 seconds to do what Marcus had died trying to do. Raven keyed her radio, broadcasting on the frequency Prophet had been using. Trident 6, this is Nightboard. I'm 10 minutes out. Confirm your position with IR strobe on my mark. The static hissed for an endless moment. Then Prophet's voice came through, rough with exhaustion and something that sounded like disbelief. Nightboard, this is Trident 6 actual. We read you loud and clear. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. We were starting to think nobody was coming. Raven felt tears prick at her eyes, hot and unexpected. She blinked them away and kept her voice steady. I am coming, Master Chief. Get your men ready to move. We're going to have about 90 seconds on the ground, so I need everyone who can walk carrying everyone who cannot. Understood, Nightboard. Prophet's voice had found its strength again. We will be ready. Raven clicked off the radio and focused on the approach. The mountains were closer now, the valley opening before them like a wound in the earth. Somewhere down there, 10 men were gathering their wounded and preparing to trust their lives to a helicopter that should not be coming and a pilot who had thrown away her career to save them. She thought of Marcus one more time. Then she pushed everything else aside and became what she had always been. A nightboard, flying into the darkness to bring her people home. Back at FOB Vanguard, Lieutenant Commander Adrian Cho stood in the shadows outside the TOC and watched Captain Prescott unravel. Through the window, she could see him pacing between consoles, barking orders at watch officers who had no power to execute them, his carefully constructed authority dissolving with every minute that passed. He had already tried to scramble another aircraft to intercept Raven. There were no other aircraft available. He had tried to contact higher command for authorization to declare her helicopter hostile. No one at Bugram or Kabul was willing to make that call on Christmas Eve without more information. He had tried to reach the Quick Reaction Force for ground interdiction. The QRF commander had politely informed him that his men would not be shooting down American helicopters without direct orders from someone with stars on their collar. Wayne Prescott was discovering what happened when a man who had built his career on politics suddenly needed warriors, and the warriors wanted nothing to do with him. Cho allowed herself a small smile. She had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of watching Prescott climb over the bodies of better officers. 3 years of carrying the guilt of the men who had died because she had provided the analysis that justified abandonment. 3 years of knowing that somewhere in the system there was a debt that needed to be paid. The door to the TOC burst open and Prescott emerged, his face flushed with impotent rage. He spotted Cho immediately, and something ugly flickered in his eyes. You, he said, stalking toward her. You gave her the intelligence. You gave her the window. Cho did not retreat. I gave her the truth. Something you seem to have difficulty with. Do you have any idea what you have done? Prescott stopped inches from her face, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. You have aided and abetted an unauthorized combat operation. You have violated every protocol in the intelligence sharing manual. You have ended your career. Maybe. Cho met his glare without flinching. But I have also given 10 Americans a chance to survive the night. That seems like a reasonable trade. This is not about those men. Prescott's voice dropped to a hiss. This is about her. This is about Okonjo and her crusade against anyone who understands how this system actually works. She destroyed Colonel Whitmore. She tried to destroy me, and you helped her. Cho felt something cold settle in her chest. She had suspected, but hearing him say it aloud was something else entirely. This was never about risk assessment, was it? This was never about protecting assets or managing tactical realities. You left those men to die because you wanted to punish her. Prescott's expression flickered, just for an instant, before the mask snapped back into place. That is a serious accusation, Lieutenant Commander. It is the truth. Cho took a step closer, pressing her advantage. I was there 3 years ago, Captain. I was the intelligence officer who provided the analysis for the mission that killed her brother. I watched you and Whitmore make the call to abort that extraction. I watched you sacrifice 6 Americans because the risk numbers did not look good enough for your promotion board. The color drained from Prescott's face. You do not know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Cho pulled her tablet from her jacket and held it up. I have the original analysis, the unedited version, before Whitmore had me change the numbers to justify his decision. I have the communications log showing that the extraction was viable, that Marcus Okonjo could have brought those men home if command had given him proper support instead of ordering him to abort. Those records are classified. They were classified. Cho smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Funny thing about classified records. They have a way of becoming unclassified when the right people start asking the right questions. I made copies before Whitmore could bury them. I have been waiting 3 years for the right moment to use them. Prescott stood frozen, his mouth working soundlessly. The man who had built his career on calculated risks was finally facing a calculation he had not anticipated. Here is what is going to happen, Cho continued. Lieutenant Commander Okonjo is going to extract those seals. She's going to bring them home. And when she lands, you're going to be standing there with a choice. You can try to court-martial her, try to destroy her career, try to bury this the way you buried everything else. Or you can do the smart thing and start figuring out how to spin this as a successful mission that happened under your command. Prescott's eyes narrowed. And if I choose the first option, then I release everything. The original analysis, the communications logs, the evidence that you and Whitmore deliberately falsified risk assessments to justify abandoning American soldiers. I'm sure the families of the men who died 3 years ago would be very interested in that information. I am sure the Senate Armed Services Committee would have questions. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind cut across the FOB, carrying the distant sound of generators and the Christmas lights blinking in their improvised patterns. Somewhere in the mountains, a helicopter was racing toward a valley where 10 men waited for salvation. This is not over, Prescott said finally. His voice had lost its edge, replaced by something hollow. No, Cho agreed. It is not. But for the first time in 3 years, the right people are going to win. She turned and walked away, leaving Prescott standing alone in the cold. Behind her, the door to the TOC stood open, spilling light onto the frozen ground. Inside, watch officers monitored screens and tracked the progress of an unauthorized helicopter carrying an unauthorized pilot toward an unauthorized extraction. None of them moved to stop it. In the valley, Prophet gathered his men for the final time. The IR strobe was ready. The wounded were positioned for rapid loading. Every man who could still hold a weapon was covering an approach vector. 5 minutes, he said. 5 minutes, and we're going home. Briggs looked up from his position by the north wall. What if the mortars start early? What if the window is wrong? Then we die fighting instead of waiting. Prophet checked his rifle one more time. But I have a feeling about this pilot. I have a feeling she does not miss her windows. The men of Trident 6 settled into their positions and waited. Above them, invisible in the darkness, the sound of rotor blades grew slowly louder. The valley opened beneath them like a cathedral of stone and shadow. Raven dropped the Black Hawk below the ridgeline and felt the aircraft shudder as crosswinds caught the rotors. The terrain was worse than she remembered, jagged outcroppings and narrow passes that left no margin for error. One wrong input, one moment of hesitation, and they would become another wreck on an Afghan mountainside. Rojas called out altitude and airspeed in a steady rhythm, his voice the anchor that kept her grounded in the mechanical reality of flight. 200 feet, 120 knots, ridgeline in 800 meters. Raven threaded the gap between two peaks and felt the helicopter respond to her touch like an extension of her own body. This was what she had been born for. This was the space where everything else fell away, and there was only the aircraft and the mission and the men who needed her. Through her night vision, she could see the compound now. A cluster of mud buildings surrounded by rubble, muzzle flashes sparking in the darkness as the SEALs traded fire with enemies they could barely see. The IR strobe pulsed from the center of the position, a heartbeat of infrared light visible only to her equipment. Trident 6, this is Nightbird. I have visual on your strobe. 2 minutes to insertion. Prophet's voice came back immediately. Copy, Nightbird. Be advised, we have enemy movement on all sides. They know something is happening. Raven checked her tactical display. The mortar positions glowed red on the overlay Cho had provided, 3 clusters of heat signatures arranged in a triangle around the compound. According to the intelligence, they would begin their reload sequence in approximately 90 seconds. That gave her a window to approach, land, load, and climb out before the tubes could be brought back to bear. 90 seconds. She had done extractions in less time, but never with this many casualties, never with this much enemy presence, never with this much riding on every single second. Rojas, she said, when we touch down, I need you on the door gun. Anything that moves toward us, you put it down. Understood. Rojas was already unstrapping from his seat, moving toward the crew chief position with practiced efficiency. What about the wounded? Prophet knows to load critical first. Whitfield goes on before anyone else. Raven adjusted their approach angle, using a dry riverbed to mask their final run. If we are not airborne in 90 seconds, we are not getting airborne at all. The helicopter screamed over the final ridge, and the compound came into full view. Raven could see the SEALs now, dark shapes moving among the rubble, dragging wounded toward the open ground where she would land. She could see the enemy too, muzzle flashes from 3 directions, tracers arcing through the night like angry fireflies. The mortar teams had not started reloading yet. She was early. Nightbird, Prophet called. You're taking fire from the east ridge. I see it. Raven banked hard, putting the bulk of the helicopter between the shooters and the cockpit. 30 seconds to touchdown. Get your people ready. She watched the clock on her display, counting down the seconds until the mortars would cycle. The first rounds would already be in the air when the window opened, the last shots of the current barrage. She needed to be on the ground before those rounds hit, needed to be loading while the crews broke down their tubes, needed to be climbing out before they could reload. 20 seconds. The compound rushed toward them, details resolving through the green haze of night vision. A collapsed wall, a burned vehicle, bodies that might be enemy or might be the 2 SEALs who had not survived the initial ambush. 10 seconds. Raven flared the helicopter, bleeding off speed in a maneuver that pushed the airframe to its limits. The rotor wash kicked up a storm of dust and debris, momentarily blinding the enemy shooters, creating a bubble of chaos that was the closest thing to cover she would get. 5 seconds. The wheels touched Afghan soil, and the clock started. 90 seconds. Go, 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 Prophet was shouting, his voice cutting through the roar of the rotors. Whitfield first. Move. Raven kept her hands on the controls, feeling the helicopter strain against the ground like a living thing desperate to fly. Through the swirling dust, she could see shapes converging on the aircraft, SEALs carrying their wounded brother between them. Whitfield's face was pale as death in the cabin lights, his eyes closed, his chest barely moving. 60 seconds. More men piled into the helicopter. Raven counted them automatically, matching faces to the number Prophet had given her. 4, 5, 6. They moved with desperate efficiency, throwing themselves into the cabin without regard for comfort or safety. Rojas opened up with the door gun, the weapon chattering in controlled bursts as he engaged targets on the eastern ridge. Brass casings rained down onto the cabin floor. The smell of cordite filled the air. 45 seconds. 7, 8, 9. Prophet was the last man moving toward the helicopter, walking backward with his rifle up, laying down covering fire for men who were already aboard. A round sparked off the fuselage inches from his head, and he did not flinch. 30 seconds. Prophet dove into the cabin and slapped the bulkhead twice. That is 10. All souls aboard. Go. Raven pulled collective and felt the helicopter leap into the sky. The ground fell away beneath them, the compound shrinking to a smear of dust and muzzle flashes. She banked hard to the west, putting the bulk of the mountain between them and the mortar positions. 15 seconds. The first mortar round hit the compound they had just left, a flash of orange fire that lit up the valley like a second sunrise. More rounds followed, a cascade of explosions that churned the earth where the helicopter had been sitting moments before. Raven checked her display. All systems green. No warning lights. No damage indicators. They had made it. Behind her, in the cabin, someone was crying. Someone else was laughing. Prophet's voice came over the intercom, rough with emotion. Nightbird, Trident 6 actual. All souls accounted for. Whitfield is stable. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Raven blinked back tears she could not afford to shed while flying. Copy, Trident 6. Welcome aboard. She turned the helicopter toward home and pushed the throttle forward. Behind them, the valley burned. Ahead, the mountains parted like a door opening onto salvation. 90 seconds. She had done it in 87. The flight back to FOB Vanguard took 23 minutes. 23 minutes of darkness and mountains, and the steady rhythm of rotor blades carrying 10 men home from the edge of death. Raven flew on instruments and instinct, her body operating the helicopter while her mind drifted through the strange calm that always followed combat. Behind her, the cabin had settled into exhausted silence. The SEALs slumped against each other and the bulkheads, their weapons still clutched in hands that had forgotten how to let go. Doc Rainier worked over Whitfield in the dim red glow of the cabin lights, checking vitals, adjusting the improvised bandages that were the only thing keeping the young petty officer alive. Prophet made his way forward, bracing himself against the movement of the helicopter as he leaned into the cockpit. His face was streaked with dirt and dried blood, his eyes hollow with fatigue, but something like peace had settled into his expression. I need to know something, he said, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Why did you come? The official word was that we were unrecoverable. No one was supposed to risk an aircraft for us. Raven kept her eyes on the instruments. Because unrecoverable is a word people use when they have already decided to let you die. It does not mean anything except that someone did the math and decided you were not worth the risk. Prophet was quiet for a moment. You know they're going to crucify you for this. Prescott is not the kind of man who forgives being proven wrong. I know. So why? Prophet pressed. Why throw away your career for 10 men you have never met? Raven thought about the question. She thought about Marcus, about the phone call that had ended her world 3 years ago, about the promise she had made to herself in the dark days that followed. She thought about Prescott and Whitmore and all the officers who had learned to value their careers more than the lives of the people they commanded. Because my brother died waiting for someone to come, she said finally. Because 3 years ago, a pilot named Marcus Okonjo flew into a kill zone to save men who had been written off, and he died because the people who should have supported him decided he was not worth the risk. She paused, feeling the old grief rise in her chest. I cannot save him, but I could save you. Prophet said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. Marcus Okonjo. I knew him. Raven's hands tightened on the controls. What? Hellman Province, 2019. I was a senior chief running a reconnaissance element that got hit bad outside Sanjin. We were pinned down, out of ammunition, calling for extraction that kept getting delayed. Prophet's voice grew distant, lost in memory. Your brother was the pilot who finally came for us. He flew through fire that should have been impossible. He got us out when everyone else said it could not be done. The world seemed to narrow around Raven, the cockpit shrinking to just her and Prophet, and the ghost of her brother hovering between them. I never got to thank him properly. Prophet continued. By the time I got back to Bagram, he had already rotated to another base. I always meant to track him down, tell him what his courage meant to me and my men. Then I heard what happened. He shook his head slowly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never got the chance. Raven blinked hard, forcing the tears back. He would have been glad to know you made it. That was all that mattered to him. Getting people home. It mattered to you too. Prophet reached out and gripped her shoulder, a brief contact that carried the weight of everything he could not say. What you did tonight, flying into that valley, risking everything. You're just like him. The best of what this uniform is supposed to mean. Raven could not speak. She nodded once, tightly, and focused on the horizon where the lights of FOB Vanguard were beginning to emerge from the darkness. Rojas called from the cabin. Commander, I'm picking up radio traffic for Vanguard. Prescott is ordering security forces to meet us on the flight line. Prophet's expression hardened. How many? Sounds like a full detail. Rojas boast. He is calling it an apprehension of unauthorized personnel. Raven felt a cold clarity settle over her. She had known this was coming. From the moment she had lifted off against orders, she had known that the price of saving these men would be her freedom, her career, everything she had built over 15 years of service. Master Chief, she said, when we land, I need you and your men to stay clear. This is between me and Prescott. Prophet shook his head. With respect, Commander, that is not how this works. You just pulled 10 SEALs out of Valley where we were supposed to die. He moved back toward the cabin, his voice carrying to every man aboard. Where I come from, that makes you one of us. And we do not let our own face firing squads alone. A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Raven saw Briggs nodding, saw the other SEALs straightening despite their exhaustion, saw even Whitfield's eyes flutter open with something like determination. Commander, Rojas caught her attention, his voice careful. We are 5 minutes out. Whatever is waiting for us, we face it together. Raven looked at the men behind her, at the warriors who had been ready to die in that valley and were now ready to stand beside her against a different kind of enemy. She thought of Marcus, of what he would say if he could see this moment. She thought he would be proud. Copy that, she said. Let's go see what Captain Prescott has planned for us. The helicopter crossed the final ridge and began its descent toward the FOB. Below, Raven could see the lights of the flight line, the shapes of vehicles arranged in a perimeter, the figures of security personnel waiting in formation. Prescott was making a show of force. He wanted everyone to see what happened to officers who defied him. Raven smiled grimly and brought the helicopter in for landing. She had faced enemy fire, hostile terrain, and the certainty of career destruction. A welcoming committee of MPs was not going to break her now. The wheels touched down. The rotors began to slow, and Lieutenant Commander Raven Okonjo prepared to face the consequences of doing what was right. The rotor wash died to a whisper as Raven completed the shutdown sequence. Through the cockpit glass, she could see them waiting. 2 Humvees with their headlights blazing, a dozen security personnel in full tactical gear, and Captain Wayne Prescott standing at the center of it all like a man presiding over an execution. She removed her helmet slowly, deliberately, giving herself time to settle the emotions that churned beneath her calm exterior. Behind her, she could hear the SEALs moving, checking weapons, preparing for a confrontation none of them had expected to face on friendly ground. Prophet appeared at her shoulder. Let me go first. My men, and I can create a buffer while you. No. Raven unstrapped and rose from her seat. This is my fight. I started it and I will finish it. She met his eyes. But I appreciate you being willing to stand with me. Prophet nodded once. We are right behind you, Commander. Raven stepped out of the helicopter and onto the tarmac of FOB Vanguard. The cold hit her immediately, the Afghan winter cutting through her flight suit like a blade. She walked toward the waiting security detail with measured steps, her boots striking the ground in a rhythm that felt almost ceremonial. Prescott watched her approach with an expression of barely contained fury. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid, every inch the commanding officer confronting a subordinate who had dared to defy him. But something in his eyes betrayed him, something that looked almost like fear. Lieutenant Commander Okonjo. His voice carried across the flight line, pitched for maximum audience. You are under apprehension for violation of direct orders, unauthorized use of military assets, and conduct unbecoming an officer. You will surrender yourself to security personnel immediately. Raven stopped 10 feet from him. She could feel the SEALs filing out of the helicopter behind her, forming a loose semicircle at her back. She could see the security personnel shifting uncomfortably, their weapons held at angles that suggested uncertainty about exactly who they were supposed to be pointing them at. I hear you, Captain. She kept her voice level, and I want to make sure everyone else hears this too. She gestured at the assembled personnel, at the watch officers who had emerged from nearby buildings, at the crowd that was gathering despite the hour. You classified 12 American servicemen as unrecoverable. You denied extraction to a SEAL team that was actively engaged with enemy forces. You made a command decision to let those men die. That decision was based on tactical assessment of risk factors. That decision was based on your personal vendetta against me. Raven took a step closer, close enough to see the sweat beading on Prescott's forehead despite the cold. You knew my brother. You knew that I testified against Colonel Whitmore. And you saw an opportunity to punish me by letting men die on Christmas Eve. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. The security personnel exchanged glances. One of them, a staff sergeant with combat patches on his sleeve, lowered his weapon slightly. Those are serious accusations, Prescott said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. Accusations you will have ample opportunity to defend at your court-martial. I look forward to it. Raven smiled, and there was no warmth in it. I look forward to presenting the evidence that Lieutenant Commander Cho has compiled. The original intelligence assessments, the communications logs, the documentation showing that you and Whitmore falsified risk analyses to justify abandoning American soldiers 3 years ago. Prescott's face went pale. That is classified information. That is the truth. Prophet stepped forward, his massive frame placing itself between Raven and the security detail. And speaking as the senior enlisted man of the team you tried to murder tonight, I will be providing my own testimony about what happened in that valley. The other SEALs moved up to flank him. 9 men, bloodied and exhausted, standing in formation behind the pilot who had saved their lives. Briggs, Rainier, the others whose names Raven did not yet know, but whose faces she would never forget. We all will, Briggs said. Every man on this team will testify to what we heard on that radio. Every man will confirm that Lieutenant Commander Okonjo was denied authorization to save us. His eyes fixed on Prescott with contempt that bordered on hatred. And every man will make sure that the families of the 2 SEALs who died tonight know exactly who is responsible. Prescott looked at the SEALs, at the security personnel who were no longer meeting his eyes, at the growing crowd of witnesses. The authority he had wielded so confidently minutes ago was crumbling around him like sand in a rising tide. This is not over, he said, but the words came out hollow. No, Raven agreed. It is not, but it will be. And when it is, Captain, you're going to answer for every man who died because you cared more about your career than their lives. A new sound cut through the tension. Rotor blades, distant but growing louder, approaching from the east. Raven looked up to see navigation lights descending toward the FOB, a helicopter she did not recognize bearing markings she had not expected. Rojas appeared at her side. Commander, I am picking up traffic on the command frequency. He listened to his earpiece for a moment, and a slow smile spread across his face. That bird is carrying Rear Admiral Chun from JSOC headquarters. Apparently someone at Bagram decided that a SEAL team extraction on Christmas Eve warranted senior oversight. Prescott made a sound that might have been a whimper. The helicopter touched down at the far end of the flight line, and a figure emerged that made every officer present snap to attention instinctively. Rear Admiral Patricia Chun was a legend in special operations circles, a 30-year veteran who had risen through the ranks on a foundation of competence and an absolute intolerance for officers who put politics above people. She walked toward the assembled group with the unhurried confidence of someone who had seen everything and was no longer impressed by any of it. Her eyes swept across the scene, taking in the security detail, the SEALs, the pale-faced captain, and the pilot who stood at the center of it all. "Someone," Admiral Chun said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the flight line, "had better start explaining why I just flew 2 hours on Christmas Eve to sort out what appears to be a command failure of spectacular proportions." Prophet stepped forward. "Admiral, Master Chief Elias Vance, Trident 6. My team was ambushed in the Karangal Valley at 1847 hours. We called for extraction and were denied by Captain Prescott, who classified us as unrecoverable." He gestured toward Raven. "Lieutenant Commander Okonjo disobeyed that order and extracted all surviving members of my team within a 90-second window under enemy fire. She saved 10 lives tonight, Admiral, and Captain Prescott wants to court-martial her for it." Admiral Chun looked at Prescott. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes made the captain take an involuntary step backward. "Is this true, Captain?" Prescott opened his mouth. No sound came out. The Admiral nodded slowly. "I see." She turned to the security detail. "Stand down. All of you." She looked at Raven. "Lieutenant Commander, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about chain of command and the proper channels for addressing tactical disagreements." "Yes, Admiral. But first," Chin turned back to Prescott, and her voice could have frozen the desert. "Captain Prescott, you are relieved of command pending a full investigation into your handling of tonight's events. You will surrender your sidearm and confine yourself to quarters until further notice." The security staff sergeant stepped forward and held out his hand. Prescott stared at him for a long moment, then slowly, mechanically, removed his pistol and handed it over. "Admiral," he started. "Not a word, Captain." Chin cut him off. "Not a single word until you have legal counsel present. Because based on what I have heard in the last 2 minutes, you're going to need it." She turned and walked toward the operations center without looking back. Prescott stood frozen on the tarmac, stripped of his weapon and his authority, watching his career collapse around him. Raven let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. It was not over. There would be investigations, inquiries, months of paperwork and testimony. But for the first time since she had lifted off into the darkness, she allowed herself to believe that she might actually survive this. Prophet appeared beside her. "You know," he said quietly, "when this is all done, I am putting you in for every commendation I can think of." Raven shook her head. "I do not need commendations, Master Chief. I just needed to bring you home." He smiled, and it transformed his exhausted face into something almost peaceful. "You did more than that, Commander. You reminded all of us what that uniform is supposed to mean." Behind them, medics were rushing toward the helicopter where Whitfield waited. Around them, the FOB was coming alive with activity as word spread of what had happened. Above them, the stars burned cold and bright in the Afghan sky. It was still Christmas Eve, and 10 men who should have died in a valley were going to live to see Christmas morning. The medical tent blazed with light and controlled chaos as Raven pushed through the entrance. Whitfield lay on the center table, surrounded by surgical staff who moved with the urgent precision of people fighting against time. His face was gray beneath the harsh fluorescent glow, his breathing shallow and irregular, but he was alive. Against all odds, he was still alive. Doc Rainier stood against the far wall, watching the surgeon's work. His hands were still stained with Whitfield's blood, his expression caught somewhere between hope and exhaustion. When he saw Raven, something shifted in his eyes. "Commander." He straightened slightly. "They say he has a chance." The shrapnel missed his major arteries. "If you had been 15 minutes later, it would have been different. But you were not 15 minutes later." Raven nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched the surgical team work for a long moment, watched the monitors that tracked Whitfield's heartbeat, Watch the young petty officer fight for his life with the same determination he had shown in that valley. He is 22, Rainier said quietly. First deployment. Took that shrapnel because he threw himself over Hendricks when the mortar hit. He shook his head. Kid barely knows how to shave, and he is already a hero. He is going to have a chance to learn. Raven turned away from the table. That is what matters now. She stepped back outside into the cold night air and found Prophet waiting for her. The Master Chief had cleaned the worst of the blood and dirt from his face, but the fatigue remained, etched into every line of his weathered features. How is he? Fighting. Raven leaned against the wall of the medical tent, suddenly aware of how tired she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the extraction and the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made her legs feel like stone. Prophet nodded and settled against the wall beside her. The FOB had transformed in the hours since their landing. Word had spread through the base like wildfire, and everywhere Raven looked she could see people watching, talking, processing what had happened. The story was already taking on a life of its own. Admiral Chun is going on a full debrief, Prophet said. She has already started pulling communications logs and flight data. By morning, she will know everything. Good. Raven closed her eyes. I want her to know everything. I want everyone to know what Prescott did and why. They were silent for a moment. Somewhere across the FOB, a generator hummed its endless song. The Christmas lights that someone had strung between the buildings blinked in their improvised patterns, red and green and white against the darkness. Can I tell you something? Prophet asked. Raven opened her eyes. Of course. When we were in that valley, when the radio went dead and we knew no one was coming, I told my men to make peace with whatever they believed in. I told them we were going to die well, die fighting, die as SEALs. Prophet's voice was steady, but something beneath it trembled. I have been in this business for 20 years. I have lost men before. I have faced death more times than I can count. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was certain. Raven waited, and then I heard your rotors. Prophet turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. I heard your helicopter coming through the darkness, and I knew. I knew someone had not forgotten us. I knew someone had looked at the same numbers Prescott looked at and decided that we were worth more than a risk assessment. You were always worth more than that, Raven said. Every one of you. Prophet shook his head. That is not the point. The point is that you believed it when no one else did. You acted on it when acting meant throwing away everything you had built. He reached out and gripped her arm. I have known a lot of warriors in my life, Commander. Men and women who would run toward gunfire without hesitation. But what you did tonight was something different. What you did tonight was not just courage. It was faith. Raven felt the tears she had been holding back finally begin to fall. She did not try to stop them. Faith in what? Faith that doing the right thing matters, even when the cost is everything. Faith that there are some things worth more than careers and promotions and the approval of people who have forgotten what service means. Prophet released her arm and stepped back. Your brother had that faith. He died for it. But tonight, you proved that it was not wasted. Tonight, you proved that the best of what he was lives on. The door to the medical tent opened, and one of the surgeons emerged, stripping bloody gloves from his hands. He looked around until he spotted Raven and Prophet, then walked toward them with the careful expression of someone delivering news. The petty officer is going to make it, he said. We stopped the internal bleeding and stabilized him for transport. He will need additional surgery at Bagram, but barring complications, he should make a full recovery. The relief hit Raven like a physical force. She sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Prophet caught her arm, steadying her. Thank you, she managed. Thank you for saving him. The surgeon shook his head. I just finished what you started, Commander. You're the one who got him here in time. He glanced between them, and something like admiration flickered in his tired eyes. What you did tonight is going to be talked about for a long time. I just wanted you to know that. He turned and walked back into the medical tent, leaving Raven and Prophet alone in the darkness. 10 men, Prophet said quietly. 10 men who are going to see their families again because of you. He straightened and squared his shoulders, the SEAL in him reasserting itself despite the exhaustion. Whatever happens next, whatever investigations and hearings and bureaucratic nonsense they put you through, remember that. Remember that 10 men are alive because you refuse to accept the unacceptable. Raven wiped her eyes and forced herself to stand straight. She thought about the conversations that lay ahead, the questions she would have to answer, the career she might still lose despite everything. She thought about Prescott, confined to quarters, his world collapsing around him. She thought about Cho, who had risked everything to give her the intelligence she needed. And she thought about Marcus, about his laugh, his courage, his unwavering belief that you did not leave people behind. She thought about the 3 years she had spent carrying his memory like a weight around her heart, wondering if his sacrifice had meant anything, wondering if anyone would ever understand why he had flown into that kill zone. Tonight, she had her answer. "Master Chief," she said, "when the debrief is done, when the Admiral has her answers and the paperwork is filed, and we have done everything they need us to do, I want to buy your team a drink. Christmas drinks on me." Prophet smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, the expression reached his eyes. "Commander, it would be our honor." Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance across the Afghan sky. The night was growing colder, the darkness deeper, but somewhere in that darkness, 10 families are going to receive the best Christmas gift imaginable. Their loved ones were coming home. The debrief lasted 4 hours. Admiral Chun sat at the head of the conference table in the TOC, her expression unreadable as witness after witness told their version of the night's events. Prophet went first, his account delivered with the precision of a man who had written countless after-action reports. Then Briggs, then Rainier, then 3 other SEALs whose names Raven was only beginning to learn. Each testimony painted the same picture. A team ambushed, a call for help, a commanding officer who had calculated the value of their lives and found them wanting, and a pilot who had refused to accept that calculation. Cho testified about the intelligence she had provided, about the 90-second window, about the evidence she had compiled over 3 years. She spoke without emotion, laying out facts and documents and communications logs that formed an unbreakable chain of accountability leading directly to Wayne Prescott's door. Rojas testified about the flight itself, about Raven's skill and composure, about the impossible approach and the flawless extraction. He described the moment when the mortars hit the compound they had just left, the margin of seconds that had separated survival from annihilation. And finally, Raven herself took the seat across from Admiral Chun and told her story from beginning to end. She did not embellish. She did not defend. She simply told the truth about what she had seen, what she had done, and why she had done it. When she finished, the room was silent. Admiral Chun studied her for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "Lieutenant Commander," the Admiral said finally, "you violated direct orders from your commanding officer. You launched an unauthorized combat mission. You took a $40 million aircraft into a hostile fire zone without proper authorization or support." She paused. "These are serious offenses." "Yes, Admiral. The consequences for such actions, under normal circumstances, would be severe. Court-martial, discharge, possible imprisonment." Chin's eyes never left Raven's face. "Do you understand that?" "I understood it when I lifted off, Admiral." Raven kept her voice steady. "I understood what I was risking. I made my choice anyway." She nodded slowly. She reached for a folder on the table beside her and opened it, revealing a stack of documents that Raven could not read from her position. "I have spent the last 3 hours reviewing testimony, evidence, and communications records," the Admiral said. "I have spoken with JSOC Command, with Naval Special Warfare, and with several very angry generals who were pulled away from their Christmas dinners to deal with this situation." She closed the folder. "Do you know what they all agree on?" Raven shook her head. "They agree that Captain Prescott made a catastrophic error in judgment that would have resulted in the deaths of 10 American servicemen. They agree that his decision was influenced by personal animosity and career considerations rather than legitimate tactical assessment. And they agree that his handling of this situation represents a fundamental failure of leadership that cannot be tolerated." Chun stood and walked around the table until she was standing directly in front of Raven. They also agree, she continued, that while your methods were unorthodox and technically in violation of regulations, your actions saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. The Admiral's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Sometimes, Lieutenant Commander, the system fails. Sometimes the chain of command breaks down because the people holding it forget what it is supposed to protect. And sometimes, an officer has to make a choice between following orders and doing what is right. Raven held her breath. I'm not going to court-martial you, Chin said. I'm not going to end your career or throw you in a cell. What I'm going to do is recommend you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary achievement in aerial flight during combat operations. She paused, and I'm going to make sure that everyone in special operations knows exactly what kind of officer you are. The breath Raven had been holding escaped in a rush. She felt dizzy, unmoored, as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. Admiral, I did not do this for recognition. I know. That is precisely why you deserve it. Chin returned to her seat. Captain Prescott will face a formal board of inquiry. Based on the evidence Lieutenant Commander Cho has provided, I expect that inquiry will expand to include his involvement in the incident 3 years ago that resulted in the death of your brother and 5 other servicemen. She met Raven's eyes. Justice moves slowly in this institution, but it does move. I promise you that. Raven nodded, not trusting her voice. The Admiral gathered her papers and stood. This debrief is concluded. All personnel are released to get some rest. She glanced at the window, where the first gray light of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky. It appears to be Christmas morning. I suggest we all try to find something to be grateful for. She walked out of the TOC, leaving Raven alone with the exhaustion and relief and strange, fragile hope that had settled in her chest. Prophet found her outside the building 10 minutes later, staring at the sunrise. The SEALs had gathered nearby, some sitting on equipment crates, others leaning against walls, all of them watching the light spread across the Afghan mountains. I heard, Prophet said, settling beside her. Distinguished Flying Cross. Raven shrugged. It does not feel real yet. Give it time. Prophet was quiet for a moment. You know what does feel real? He gestured at his men, at the sunrise, at the FOB waking up around them. This, all of us here alive, watching Christmas morning happen, that feels real. Rojas approached with a satellite phone in his hand. Commander, I just got off the line with my wife. He was smiling, the kind of smile that transformed his whole face. She says to tell you that you're invited to dinner when we get home. She says anyone who brings her husband back safe on Christmas has a standing invitation to her table for life. Raven felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside her. The first real laugh she had managed in longer than she could remember. Tell her I accept. One by one, the other SEALs drifted over, offering handshakes and thanks and the quiet words of gratitude that warriors shared when words felt inadequate. Briggs told her about his daughter's first Christmas. Rainier showed her a photo of his newborn son. Men who had been strangers 12 hours ago were now bound to her by something stronger than blood or rank or regulation. When the last of them had said their piece, Prophet stepped forward one final time. Commander, there is one more thing. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that glinted in the morning light. A challenge coin, Raven realized. The kind that special operations teams minted for their own, symbols of belonging that could not be bought or requisitioned. This is a Trident 6 coin, Prophet said. Every member of my team carries one. We do not give them to outsiders. He pressed the coin into her palm. You're not an outsider anymore. Raven looked down at the coin at the trident and skull and crossed rifles that marked it as belonging to one of the most elite units in the American military. Her throat tightened. Master Chief, I do not know what to say. Prophet smiled. Say you will be there when we need you. Say you will keep flying into the dark to bring people home. Say you will never forget what that uniform means. Raven closed her fingers around the coin and felt its weight, solid and real and permanent. I promise, she said. I promise. Christmas dinner at FOB Vanguard was not supposed to happen. The mess hall had been scheduled to serve cold rations, The kitchen staff reduced to a skeleton crew like everything else on base. But somewhere between dawn and noon, word had spread about what had happened in the valley, and people had started showing up with whatever they could contribute. Someone found a frozen turkey in the back of a supply freezer. Someone else produced canned cranberries and instant mashed potatoes. The cooks who had expected a quiet shift found themselves orchestrating an improvised feast while soldiers, airmen, and sailors crowded into the mess hall with the eager energy of people who had been given something to celebrate. Raven sat at a table in the corner with Rojas on one side and Prophet on the other. The SEALs of Trident 6 had claimed the surrounding seats, their exhaustion temporarily forgotten in the warmth of food and company and survival. Briggs was telling a story about a disastrous Thanksgiving mission 3 years earlier that had everyone laughing. Rainier kept checking his phone for updates from the medical facility at Bagram, where Whitfield was recovering. "He is awake," Rainier announced, looking up from the screen with a grin. "Doctors say he is asking for Jell-O and complaining about the TV channels. He's going to be fine." A cheer went up from the table. Prophet raised his cup of coffee in a toast. "To Whitfield, too stubborn to die." "To Whitfield," the others echoed. Raven drank and felt the warmth spread through her chest. She had not slept in over 30 hours, but somehow the exhaustion had receded to a distant hum beneath the buzz of conversation and laughter. There would be time for rest later. Right now, she wanted to be present in this moment, surrounded by men who had become her brothers in the span of a single night. Cho appeared at the edge of the table, a tray of food in her hands and uncertainty in her expression. Raven waved her over without hesitation. "Sit," she said. "You are part of this too." Cho settled into an empty chair, and the SEALs made room for her without comment. Whatever barriers had existed between intelligence and operations, between officers and enlisted, had dissolved in the shared experience of the night before. "I spoke with Admiral Chum before she left," Cho said quietly. "She is taking the evidence I compiled directly to the Inspector General. Prescott is finished, but she thinks there may be others involved. People who helped cover up what happened 3 years ago." Raven nodded. "Good. Let them investigate. Let them find everyone who had a hand in it." She thought about Marcus, about the years she had spent wondering if anyone would ever be held accountable for his death. Prophet leaned over. "You know, when I get back stateside, I'm going to visit your brother's grave. If you'll tell me where it is." Raven felt her throat tighten. "Arlington, Section 60. I will bring flowers." Prophet's voice was soft. "And I will tell him what his sister did. I will tell him that his faith was not misplaced." The tears came again, but this time Raven did not fight them. The sun hung low over the mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose. The air was cold but clean, carrying the scent of snow from the distant ridges. She found a quiet spot behind the communications building, away from the bustle of the FOB, and pulled out her phone. The satellite connection took a moment to establish, but eventually the call went through. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Raven? Baby, is that you? I have been trying to reach you all night." "I know, Mama. I am sorry. Things got complicated." Raven leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. "I am okay. I just wanted to hear your voice." They talked for 20 minutes. Raven did not tell her mother what had happened. Not yet. There would be time for that conversation later, when she was home, when she could hold her mother's hands and explain why she had risked everything. For now, she just listened to the familiar voice, let it wrap around her like a blanket, let it remind her of who she was and where she came from. Before she hung up, her mother said something that stopped her heart. "I dreamed about Marcus last night." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "He was smiling. He looked peaceful, and he said to tell you that he was proud." Raven could not speak. She pressed the phone against her ear and let the silence stretch between them. "I do not know what it means," her mother continued, "but I thought you should know. Whatever you are doing over there, wherever you are, your brother is watching. And he is proud." The call ended, and Raven stood alone in the fading light, her phone clutched in her hand and her heart full of something she could not name. She thought about faith, about the choices that define us, about the people we carry with us, even after they are gone. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the challenge coin Prophet had given her. The metal was warm from her body heat, the engraved trident catching the last rays of sunlight. She turned it over in her fingers, memorizing its weight, its texture, its meaning. 10 men, 90 seconds, one impossible choice, and a brother's legacy finally fulfilled. If this story moved you, we would love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment about what resonated with you, or share your own experience with courage and sacrifice. Tell us about the heroes in your life, the ones who refused to leave anyone behind. Raven slipped the coin back in her pocket and walked toward the mess hall, toward the laughter and light and the family she had found in the most unlikely of places. Behind her, the sun sank below the mountains, painting the sky in colors that looked almost like hope. Christmas was nearly over, but for 10 men and the pilot who had saved them, it would be a Christmas none of them would ever forget. And somewhere, beyond the mountains and the stars and the thin veil between worlds, Marcus Okonjo smiled. His little sister had finally come home.